Ready to dig into some serious philosophy. Today, we're diving deep into the world of Anaximander.
Really fascinating stuff. We're talking about a guy who was wrestling with some big questions, the kind of stuff people are still trying to figure out today, centuries later.
Yeah, he lived way, way back there in ancient Greece, right? 6th century BC. It's almost hard to wrap your head around.
Right, picture this. Anaximander was born in Miletus, a busy port city. Imagine the trade, the ideas. It was a melting pot, really. And it was in this environment that Anaximander started to think about the universe in a whole new way.
So not just some random philosopher then.
Oh, no, not at all. He was actually a student of Thales, another huge name in early philosophy. Just imagine the conversations they must have had.
Like a philosophical dream team. But to be honest, when I hear pre-Socratic philosopher, I kind of zone out. What's the big deal about these guys? Why should we care what they thought thousands of years ago?
Because they were grappling with the fundamental questions we still ask today. What is the universe? Where did it come from? What are we doing here? Except they didn't have all the fancy telescopes and labs we have now. They had to figure it out just by thinking really, really hard.
And that's where Anaximander's concept of the Apeiron comes in, right? That seems to be his most radical, most mind-blowing idea.
Yeah, the Apeiron. It's a tricky concept, but bear with me because it's pretty amazing when you start to unpack it. Basically, Anaximander thought that everything we can see and touch and experience came from this thing he called the Apeiron.
So what is it, like fire, water?
Not quite. It's not an element in the traditional sense. Imagine like this vast, endless, primordial, well, imagine like a fog, but not made of water vapor or anything we know. More like pure potential. Unlimited, undefined, constantly shifting and changing. That's about as close as we can get to picturing the Apeiron.
Okay, so it's like trying to describe a color you've never seen before. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But how does the universe, with all its stars and planets and everything, how does all that come from this formless apron?
Well, Anaximander believed that within this Apeiron you had these opposing forces, these fundamental tensions, like hot and cold, wet and dry. And these forces weren't just randomly floating around. There were inherent laws, a kind of cosmic dance, governing their interactions.
So I'm picturing this swirling fog of potential, and then, bam, hot and cold start battling it out, wet and dry jump into the ring. Then what? How does that create a whole universe?
Think of it like those opposing forces that kind of carved out like little pockets of order amidst all that chaos.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
Like imagine that apron like a giant pot of cosmic soup, right? And as it simmers, some parts get hotter, others cooler, and that's how Anaximander pictured the elements forming fire, air, water, earth, each finding its place.
So not just a one-time creation event, but this constant push and pull, this emergence and change driven by these fundamental forces.
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting because Anaximander, he didn't just leave it at that as some abstract theory.
Right, he was trying to explain the actual world around him.
Exactly. Like he used these ideas to explain, for example, weather patterns. He talked about the heat of the sun, drawing up moisture from the earth, forming clouds.
And then the cold air causing the moisture to condense, creating rain.
Precisely. No need for, gods hurling thunderbolts or anything like that.
He was coming up with early scientific explanations. That's pretty radical for his time.
It really is. And that's what makes Anaximander so fascinating, this drive to understand the natural world through observation, through deduction, like a proto-scientist.
And speaking of which, that brings us to another one of his truly revolutionary ideas, the Earth floating in space.
Ah, yes. Now we're talking about a concept that was centuries ahead of its time. You have to remember that back then, most people, they pictured the Earth as this flat disk, right?
Right, like resting on something.
Exactly, like pillars, a giant turtle, you name it. It had to be supported by something, obviously.
Had to have something to hold it up, right?
But Anaximander throws all that out the window. He says, nope, the Earth is a cylinder, and get this, it's just suspended in the center of the universe.
Completely unsupported.
No turtles, no pillars, nothing. Just hanging there in the vastness of space.
Whoa.
That must have been a hard sell back then.
You think? That's mind-blowing. How did he even come up with an idea like that?
It's hard to say for sure, but some scholars think maybe he was observing the way the sun and the moon and the stars, they all move across the sky in these like perfect circles, right?
Yeah.
So maybe he thought, well, if those celestial objects can move so freely, why not the Earth too?
Like he had this intuition about the cosmos, even without telescopes or any of the things we take for granted today.
And it doesn't stop there. Anaximander also had some really interesting ideas about the structure of the cosmos as a whole. He envisioned this system of concentric wheels of fire with the Earth at the center.
Concentric wheels of fire. Okay, you're going to have to explain that one.
Okay, so picture this. Imagine the Earth is surrounded by these invisible wheels, and each wheel holds a celestial body: the sun, the moon, the stars.
Okay.
And get this, he even believed that the sun was like a hole in one of these wheels, allowing the fire from this hidden cosmic furnace to shine through.
Wow, that's like it's some ancient Greek special effects show. And he's coming up with this centuries before anyone even considered that the Earth might be round.
That's Anaximander for you. He wasn't afraid to think outside the box, even if it meant going against everything everyone thought they knew.
So we've got the Earth floating in space, these wheels of fire. I mean, is there anything this guy didn't think about?
It's like his brain was just constantly going, wasn't it? And it wasn't just the cosmos he was thinking about. Remember we talked about his work as a map maker?
Oh, right. He wasn't just some, like, armchair philosopher. He was trying to map the entire world.
Yeah. Can you imagine trying to do that back then? No satellites, no GPS, just like your own observations and a whole lot of guesswork. And yet he tried to create this visual representation of the known world. It's incredible, really.
It really shows how much he wanted to understand the world, not just where it came from, but like
Yeah.
what it actually looked like.
Exactly. And don't forget, he was also fascinated by geometry. He might even be the one who brought the sundial to Greece.
Wow, seriously.
It's possible. Measuring time, understanding shapes and angles. These weren't just abstract ideas to him. They were all part of understanding the universe and our place in it.
He was connecting the dots in a way that nobody had ever even thought to do before. From the cosmos to, like, the way shadows move across the ground. It's amazing.
And that's why Anaximander is still so relevant today. He reminds us that, real knowledge isn't about just accepting what everyone tells you. It's about asking those big questions, challenging assumptions, always being open to new ways of seeing things.
A true pioneer. And to think, he figured all this stuff out over 2,500 years ago. Makes you wonder what obvious explanations we accept today will be laughed at centuries from now.
Right. That's the beauty of it. We're always learning, always discovering. It never really ends, does it?
Definitely something to think about. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious.